Hello?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My audio, you didn't hear me before though, did you?
No.
Okay, my audio is going out. Okay, recording?
Yes.
We'll get started, okay. I'll close this. Okay, well, welcome everyone to Women in Research Ireland's first fully online event. So my name is Dr. Susan Feddix, and I'm co-director and co-founder of Women in Research Ireland, otherwise known as WIRI. Today we have a very special presentation featuring Professor Jocelyn Bell Burnell from University of Oxford. However, first, I'd like to introduce my fellow members of WIRI who are present. So we have Dr. Joanne Kenny, who is a fellow co-director of WIRI.
Hi.
And then we have Ms. Martha Goldman, who is treasurer and co-founder of WIRI.
Hello.
We have Dr. Kathy Corcoran, who is a committee member.
Hello.
We have Ms. Rebecca Emmett, who is also a committee member. And she's hidden. And then finally, Dr. Roisin Loftus, who is also a committee member.
Hi, everyone.
So we would like to thank the Royal Society of Chemistry, Inclusion and Diversity Fund for their financial support. Also, this event was promoted in connection with Trinity Women Grads. And today we're encouraging live tweeting. So as you see what I've written there, the hashtag is WIRIStars. And so just to give a background on Women in Research Ireland, we were a volunteer-run registered charity, which was founded in 2017 in Dublin. And our mission is to build a community which unites women and other underrepresented groups. We also look to maintain a platform for unheard voices to discuss issues and create change. We have been hosting monthly events in person until this March due to the pandemic. However, now, as you see, we switched over to online events. So please follow us on Twitter and Instagram to learn about future events that are coming up online. And now to introduce our speaker, Professor Jocelyn Bell Burnell. She's an astrophysicist at the University of Oxford. She inadvertently discovered pulsars as a graduate student in radio astronomy in Cambridge, which opened up a new branch of astrophysics. This work was recognized by the award of a Nobel Prize to her supervisor. She's currently a visiting academic at Oxford and also Chancellor of the University of Dundee, Scotland. She has been president of the UK's Royal Astronomical Society and was the first female president of the Institute of Physics for the UK and Ireland. She is one of the founders of the Athena SWAN scheme, and in 2018 she received the Breakthrough Prize of $3 million American. In February, she was part of the 2020 International Her Story Light Festival, which we see here on Instagram. And we see her image was projected onto the Titanic Museum in Belfast. So now I'll hand it over to her, where she will discuss with us the title and a talk entitled Women in Astronomy. Following her talk, she will take questions from the audience. So please, during the presentation, type your questions to us. Professor? Stop sharing.
Share screen, share. Right, do folks see a title page?
Yes.
Good, excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you for this opportunity to speak with WIRI, if not meet with WIRI. And I'm aware there are probably one or two men as well. I noted the name of Fred Rosenberg come up. Long time no see, Fred. So I'm going to talk about women in astronomy and other sciences, but primarily astronomy because that's where my background is. And if I can make the thing page down, it would help. Yep. So I'm going to start just with a few biographical details. I'm going to talk about the position of women in astronomy worldwide, a bit about the road to equality in the UK and the Athena SWAN initiative, and then a little bit about some other initiatives and outstanding questions. And I hope I will leave plenty of time for your comeback and your questions. So I started life in the north of Ireland, County Armagh, small town called Lurgan. It wasn't then the most forward thinking of places. I don't know what it's like now. It's a long time since I've lived there. But it was a place that thought boys were much better than girls, who thought that girls were destined to be married women, wives and mothers, and that their education should reflect that. At that stage in Northern Ireland, we sat an exam at age 11 or 12. In England, it's called the 11 plus. In Northern Ireland, it was called the qualifying, because it was believed that at that stage you could judge whether a kid was going to be academic and needing a grammar school education or needing a more technical or vocational education. And I failed this exam, which wasn't a very good start to my academic career. My parents fought for me to stay in the academic stream because it had always been planned that I'd go away to boarding school at age 13. Parents were quite keen we had some of our education outside of Northern Ireland. So I joined the academic stream, but on the Wednesday of the first week of the first term, a message went round our class that that afternoon the boys were to go to a certain place and the girls to another. And my thinking was, this is sport. That's why they're separating us. But it wasn't. They sent the boys to the science labs and the girls to the cookery room, because everybody knew that girls were only going to become married wives and mothers. They didn't need a grammar school education. They needed to learn how to cook and make beds and sew things. When I told my parents that evening, having failed to achieve any change myself, they hit the roof and phoned the head teacher, as did the parents of a couple of other girls, and thereafter the science class had 3 girls and all the boys. And I'm fairly certain it was the first time that teacher had taught girls. So science was a bit of an issue right from the start. But we did physics that term and I loved it and I came top of the class. I don't remember getting any praise from the teacher. I remember the teacher lambasting the boys for allowing a girl to beat them. It was a bit better in education in England, but Lurgan certainly was very clear that the destination of a female was to be a wife and mother. And your future was mapped out from about age 11. So, women in astronomy today, worldwide. There is an international astronomy body called the International Astronomical Union. And you can belong to it. And the secretary has been keeping data on the membership for a good many years. He was a Danish scientist, Danish astrophysicist, married to another astrophysicist. And whilst he had no particular trouble getting jobs, she had enormous trouble getting jobs. And he began to wonder if this was something to do with her being female and being female in Denmark. So he started collating the membership data segregated by gender and by country. And subsequently, it's been segregated by age as well. I've been following that data. They update it every few years. I've looked at countries which have more than 200 astronomers so that the root N errors aren't too big. And I have pulled out the countries that have more than 200 astronomers and listed them by their percentage that is female. The world average is 17% in this data, 17% female. It's going up by about 1% every few years. In this table, which I hope you can see, the countries that have more than the world average are shown in green, and the ones that are below are in a pinky fawnish color. And the countries that are high, relatively speaking, are Italy, France, Brazil, Spain. Russia comes next, but Russia has always had a lot of women doing things because they had a huge loss of life in the world wars and the flu epidemic, a huge loss of male life particularly. So the women have always had to go out to work, and there's always been state nursery provision for childcare. Going back to my table, the English-speaking countries are grouped at a little bit below the world average. The USA provides 25% of the overall membership, so it's quite an achievement for it to be below the world average. Northern European countries come lower down than Southern European. India and Japan, it's probably no surprise seeing them low down that list. Although the numbers have shifted slightly year on year, the pattern has remained the same. If I summarize it as Southern European countries have the highest percentage, Central and South America not bad, English-speaking countries a bit below the world average, and Northern European countries lower still. Now, there are some caveats about this data, and I give the URL if people want to go looking themselves. Membership is for tenured astronomers, so larger numbers of younger women might not be counted. And you have to be nominated by your country's professional body. And your country's professional body is probably still male dominated. But what could produce these geographical effects? I think it's culture, not women's brains. I'm told there's a similar distribution for physics and maths internationally, but they don't have bodies like the International Astronomical Union, so they don't have the data that the astronomers have. So let's see what the cultural effects might be. It could be that in certain countries, other subjects are seen as more prestigious, maybe engineering, and so the men are there. In some cultures, the parents probably still live nearby, so maybe they can help with childminding, liberating the women to go be astronomers. Or maybe there's a great range of wealth in the country, and there are lots of poor people, so there'll be some poor women who would be very happy to come into your house, be your cook, your nursemaid, your laundry maid, your cleaner, your childminder, enabling you to go off and be an astronomer. The data is interesting nonetheless, and it says to me that it's not women's brains, it's the culture in your country that determines whether or not you can do astrophysics or indeed physics. I want now to switch topic a bit. Give me a moment. And talk about what's been happening in Britain, the road to equality in UK. For a good many years now, data has been collected on the number of men and women in university departments and which level they're at. And it won't surprise you to learn that women are in the minority, and the minority gets smaller the higher the level in the university. It shows women progress more slowly than their male counterparts. Some would say that's because the women brag less, but I think there are systemic issues as well. Interestingly, it shows women put in fewer grant applications. If they're unsuccessful, they wait longer before repeating the application, and they're usually applying for smaller amounts of money. And women are also less willing to apply for jobs. So we had a stage in Britain where we decided we need to fix the women. Clearly, it was the women who were deficient. They needed to be made braver, more willing to put in applications to apply for jobs. And so they started running special training courses for women to address these deficiencies. There was a tacit assumption that the way science and scientific society was operating was perfectly okay, thank you. The problem was with the women. Clearly, the data showed. So we started, as well as training courses, having some special funding for women. And one in particular was called Returner Fellowships, for women coming back after a career break, often maternity leave. And sometimes there were other things open to women only. But there was a nasty kickback. People would say, you only got that position because you're a woman, you're not up to the standard of the rest of us. And in one or two instances, people would go on saying, you're pulling down the department, you should resign. That really happened. Increasingly these days, these types of funding are open to both men and women. So the women can say, I got the money in competition with a male. Right. It's not just for women. Then the funding agencies began to realize that giving funding to individual women was great for those women, but nothing else was changing. There was no institutional change. So there was no attempt to make the place fairer for everybody, not just for women. And the funding agencies began to be concerned. And we entered an era of institutional change. Now, there are one or two things I want to say very quickly. You can have individuals who are not sexist, not discriminating, but nonetheless work in an organization that is, and that's because the structures of the organization could be sexist. So examples of institutional sexism: possible biases in recruitment, retention, the way jobs are advertised, unawareness of different styles, different management styles. You know, they're not acting like an alpha male, therefore they're efficient. And one thing that we're addressing more and more is unconscious bias. And I have a favorite example of unconscious bias. You've probably in your life had to fill out a form which said you were, which sex or gender you were, or whether you preferred not to say, or whether you were something other. And classically, you've got 4 boxes listed or 4 options listed, and they go male, female, other, prefer not to say. Well, I'm very happy with the other and prefer not to say. I want to focus on the first 2, male and female. Why does the male come before the female? It's not alphabetical order. It's an example of unconscious bias. Men come first and the women follow. So if you find questionnaires that have male and female in that order, you can be pretty certain that some unconscious bias is being shown. Unconscious bias can be quite hard to spot, I have to admit, but looking at statistics can often help. I sat as an external on a university, which I won't name, a university's professorial salary enhancement, whatever. And they hadn't done it for a couple of years. They had a whole load of applications. I think it was about 70. And we went through the application saying, yeah, I'd be happy to give this person 1 increment. I'd be happy to give that person 2 increments and so on. And I kept a rough tally as we went along. And at the end I said, you know, on average, we've given the men 1.5 increments and the women 0.5 increments. That's unconscious bias operating. They had all just had unconscious bias. So they said, oh. And we went back through all the women's applications. We didn't have time to go back through all 70, but we went back through all the women's applications, looking at them more carefully. And they'd say things like, well, you know, I'd be quite happy to give this woman 2 increments, not just 1. And by the end of the exercise, there was no perceptible difference between the increments given to men and women. So watching the statistics can often show that you've got unconscious bias, and it's worth revisiting the exercise if you can. It's important, I believe, to have the diversity, not just gender diversity, but all sorts of diversity. And this has now been established by McKinsey and Company, the business research body, commercial research. They found that the companies that have the most diverse executive and board, and that means diverse in gender and or ethnicity, the ones that are the most diverse are the most robust, the most flexible, and the most successful than companies which are less diverse. So having diversity at top level certainly makes a difference. And I suspect it makes a difference all the way through. Now, if you work in an Irish university, you will become aware recently of Athena SWAN. And I want to talk a little bit about the origins of Athena SWAN because I was heavily involved in that, as you heard in the introduction. It goes back quite a long way, probably about 20 years, maybe even more, 25 years, when a small group of senior women met after work at their own expense in a borrowed room in London. I have photographs of some of this, but not all of this. Julia Higgins, top left, Wendy Hall, Jill Samuel, who actually worked for Zeneca, not universities, Caroline Fox, who I'll come back to myself, and Nancy Lane. And we floundered around wondering how we could improve the lot of women in science technology. And Caroline, bottom left, is a bit of a psychologist and said, you know, university vice chancellors are competitive guys. And they were all men at that point. They're competitive guys. If we create a competition for the most women-friendly university, they'll compete. Oh, boy, well, that's worth a try. But we were poor. We couldn't afford a prize. Well, we all chipped in and we afforded a glass rose bowl. And we announced the competition. And she was right. A number of vice chancellors submitted their university as the most woman-friendly university. And for several years, we awarded this glass rose bowl. And it gradually grew and gradually grew. And then a major change came when Dame Sally Davis, who was then the Chief Medical Officer for Health in England and Wales, I think. Yes, I think that's right. She was meeting with the heads of medical schools, university medical schools, talking about the kind of things you talk about when you meet with your funder. And at the end of the meeting, she said, "You're all men. Where are the women?" And then said, "Oh, doesn't matter." And she had, as she put it, a rush of blood to the head. And she said, "If you want access to my research funding, by March of next year, you have to hold Athena SWAN Silver." And suddenly Athena SWAN became very popular. She forgot to tell the Athena SWAN organization, but they got that sorted out. And so medical schools started doing Athena SWAN. And then other funding bodies started saying, yeah, if you want our funding, you've got to hold Athena SWAN Award. And it grew and it grew. It's now, as many of you know, being exported to Ireland. It now includes humanities and social sciences, as well as science and engineering and medicine. It's been exported beyond Ireland. It's gone to Australia. It's gone to Canada. And it's coming in the USA, but it's broader in the USA. It's not just gender, it's other minorities, ethnic and LGBT and things like that. So it's doing very well. Of course, it probably has some downsides, and some of you are probably becoming acutely aware of the downsides. But basically, it's aimed at bringing about institutional change. How woman-friendly is your university or department? And I see change happening really rather fast, possibly too fast. I'm a bit scared of a kickback. So it's been extended, as I said, to arts and humanities and all departments, and it's been exported as well. issues that I think could be difficult. The change has been rather rapid, been forced to be rather rapid, albeit it's long overdue, and universities probably should not be surprised that it's come about. I'm still waiting for a bit of pushback. I'm aware of some issues with it, but a recent review in Britain found it was doing good stuff. Could it be a license for overzealous witch hunts or Twitter campaigns? Indeed, that raises the question, what is the optimum way to change a body, to change society? And working in Oxford, we have a lot of international members of the department. And one thing I'm exercised by is, what's the best way to acclimate people incoming from another culture to our expectations and practices? Maybe some of you have faced that, I don't know. Those of you who've done Athena SWAN cases will know there's a hell of a lot of work, particularly at the beginning when the data that your admin collect isn't in the right format that you need for this. But it has forced departments to examine their statistics. It has certainly encouraged some conversations around gender. And very important, it's no longer seen as an issue for the minority group, i.e. the women, to solve. And having got this one going smoothly, it will help with other issues like Black and minority ethnic, LGBTQ+, and other issues. I'm left wondering, and I don't know if I can articulate this properly that you can understand it, but I'll try and you can come back at me afterwards. I've got some lovely images of ivy climbing up the walls of old buildings. They're actually taken around Oxford. We are enabling through Athena SWAN more women to climb up the ranks, a bit like the ivy climbing up the building. But is the structure underneath changing? Are we simply allowing women to cling to a structure that could be inherently male? Is this a valid point? Does it need thinking about? Some other nuances. It's often the female members of staff who are disproportionately asked to take on the completion of the Athena SWAN return. I'm also hearing about women postdocs who are being invited to job interviews and things like that, simply to make up the number of female candidates with no intention to appoint them. Now, okay, they're getting experience of job interviews, but job interviews and preparation for them take a lot of time. And one of the things I think isn't always, or a dimension that isn't always clear, at least in Britain, is that the UK Athena SWAN is not an award for where you are in gender equity on some absolute scale. It's an award for your program to improve your institution's situation. So the gradient is important as your current level. It's sad that incentives are needed, particularly incentives like the withdrawal of research funding, but it does seem to be necessary. The system is not perfect, but I feel it's a great improvement over having nothing. And with that, I will stop and turn back to the chair. Thank you. Oh no, I won't stop. I've got one or two snippets, sorry. Writing in 1930, the Earl of Birkenhead, foreseeing the world a century later. In 2030, women will still, by their wit and charm, inspire the most able men towards heights that they could never themselves achieve. In 1946, 2/3 of people in the USA thought men were smarter than women. A couple of years ago, it's 86% think men and women are equally smart. And in the UK, the Advertising Standards Authority just about a year ago banned adverts that presented harmful stereotypical gender images. So belittling a man changing a nappy, belittling a woman who couldn't park a car, baby milk adverts showing boys becoming engineers and girls becoming ballerinas. This is fantastic. Does it happen in Ireland? Could it happen in Ireland? I'd be interested to know. I'm going to skip that. Thank you. Thank you for your interest. And I'm going to stop share at that point.
Yes, hello.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Bell Burnell. Thank you very much. You can hear me?
Yes, thank you. I can.
Okay, great. Let me get back to putting up the slides. There we go. That's where we finished. Yes, thank you very much for going through all of the, not only astronomy, but the Athena SWAN, which, as you know, has become very critical here in Ireland, especially now that there's limitations and funding won't be allowed unless the entire university has it. So I believe, Joanne, we're going to start with a question from you.
So Anne-Marie Glynn asks that you mentioned Athena SWAN as being exported, and she's curious to understand more. Is Athena SWAN linked with similar global initiatives? And is the global data comparable or inferable?
So Athena SWAN started in the UK. I think Ireland was the next country to, or the Irish research funders were the next country to require it. Next was Australian research funders requiring it, then Canadian, and they're trying to get it brought in the USA. So it's still all English speaking world. It's not more global than that.
Okay, then I have a follow-up question about the Athena SWAN as well. Because as far as I know, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I know, yeah, I was on the Athena SWAN assessment team for Trinity in the biochemistry department. So yes, all the paperwork, all the statistics, everything that had to be gathered. But also, not only is it a matter of gender equality, but we were also focusing on work-life balance. And it seemed like the Athena SWAN was also moving into that area because, you know, there's been a lot of discussion about mental health issues, especially all the pressures that are going on. So was that also a consideration when you were launching the Athena SWAN, or it was simply just getting the gender equality off the ground and then I guess seeing where it goes from there into these other areas that we also need to have balance in?
It wasn't part of the original Athena SWAN because the gender issue was the overriding one. So no, we just focused on gender initially. But it's good that other places are developing it, broadening it. I think that's excellent.
We have a question.
Next question.
From Jessie Santoro asks, she's wondering, how did you get interested in astronomy?
It was clear I was good at physics as soon as I got to do it in secondary school. And I continued good at physics. It was my best science. And going through secondary school, I was wondering, right, I'm probably going to do a physics degree at university. What way am I going to go after that? Because with a physics degree, you can go many, many directions. And I was on the lookout for, you know, possible routes. And then my father, who was very widely read, brought home some astronomy books from the public library. One of them was by Fred Hoyle, who was a very good communicator. And I took this book to my bedroom and read it cover to cover. I was about 14 at the time. Quite a tough read for a 14-year-old, but I managed it. And we've been learning about rotation at school in physics. And here he's talking about the rotation of galaxies. And I could suddenly see the way the physics I was learning at school applied to these big astrophysics questions. So I thought, right, I'll be an astronomer. And so I knew from quite an early age that that's what I really wanted to be. And that was a great help, knowing what you wanted to do.
Great. We have another question for you. What have been the most effective strategies you've noticed in achieving root culture change in higher education institutions?
I think data, particularly since I work with physicists, data is the strongest weapon you have. And there are some quite well, or certainly have been, some quite well entrenched attitudes, you know, so-and-so's a good guy, we should recruit them kind of approach. So having data and trying to be objective about it is something that physicists can't really argue with. So that tends to be the best way. But on the negative side, it has often been me gently, I hope, challenging, raising, you know, presenting data and things like that. So I've always risked being seen as a troublemaker because, you know, I was saying, look at the data. It doesn't say what you're saying and so on.
Hi, and that was a fantastic and very inspiring talk. Thank you so much. So the next question is from Vivian Rath, who just asks, the percentage of female astronomers in the world is very sadly striking, but how are we doing in other STEM subjects, do you know?
Astrophysics is better than straight physics. Maths will be probably a bit better than physics. Chemistry will be perceptibly better. Biology is the science subject that has the largest proportion of women. It also has one of the most dramatic fall-offs if you take the percentage of an undergraduate class that is female compared with the percentage of the professoriate that's female. Biology starts high and falls fast. Physics starts low and doesn't fall very much.
It doesn't have too far to fall.
Not too far to fall, yes.
Questions are coming in fast. We have another one here. Someone's wondering, is Athena SWAN linked in any way to the institution's mechanisms of dealing with sexual harassment and bullying in the workplace, which is a substantial barrier to a woman's career?
I doubt if it's officially linked. But, you know, if there's a lot of harassment and bullying and women leave, that will show in the statistics, which the department then has to explain when they do their Athena SWAN return. Now that's got quite a long time constant. That's quite a slow process. And it may be that in some places it is linked and I don't know about it. But I don't know of examples of that linkage.
Okay, we have another question from Linda Cardiff. She says, what measures does Professor Bell Burnell believe are necessary to change the way in which students from post-primary schools learn about historical female role models in STEM fields?
I don't know a lot about the education in Ireland. There are now an increasing number of books, you know, goodnight stories for rebel girls and things like that, that feature eminent women. Going slightly off the question, one thing I would love to see is if you go into a toy shop in Britain, there's a whole area of the shop with blue toys and a whole area of the shop with pink toys. And the pink toys are all sort of passive princess type things. And the blue toys tend to be, I think, the more interesting and include things like construction kits. We market girls' toys as being for little princesses and boys' toys for being for budding engineers. And that does not help the case of women in science. I would really like toys to be toys. And there is actually a website called Let Toys Be Toys. Stop this silly blue and pink.
Great, thank you. I have another one here from Donata Iandolo. regarding Professor Bell Burnell's comment on the need for an institutional change. Donata has more of a comment, but sees more important overlaps between the need of a change in research culture for both mental health and gender issues. And what is Professor Bell Burnell's thoughts on this?
Yes, I think that's a fair comment. And you're in lockdown, I'm in lockdown. For those of us with children, there are probably childcare issues. My children are grown up, so I don't have it as an issue now. But imagine you've got a small child and jobs are beginning to start up, but childcare isn't. So who stays at home to look after the child? There's a suggestion abroad that the coronavirus lockdown will set back gender equality quite a long way, because the women are the ones who are not working because of childcare, where their male partners are working now.
I actually have a follow-up question on that one, Professor, from Cian Lynch. Cian asks, do you think institutions really are changing their attitude toward gender equality, or are male-dominated institutions simply attempting to act as though they are more equal?
Certainly around Oxford, which I would say was fairly traditional. In Oxford physics, there is huge change because both the head of department and the man who holds the gender and equity brief are very, very keen on improving the gender ratio and the ethnic minority and all that kind of thing. So there certainly are places where change is very much in the air. How long that lasts? Will it last till after we get the next head of department? I don't know. But certainly some places are doing a lot right now.
Okay, next question. It's from an anonymous attendee. And first of all, they'd like to say fantastic talk. And also wondering, Professor, if you believe the idea of you can't be what you can't see with regards to seeing women in higher positions than you.
Yeah, I know. The role models are rather necessary. But some of us have had to do it without the role models, just finding our own way. And I think more women could have a go at it, to be honest. You don't have to have somebody to follow. And slavishly following somebody is not always a good idea, because you might well be a different personality, different skills, different strengths. So yeah, don't necessarily wait for there to be a woman ahead of you. Go for it. Try and get a group of other women to support you, though. You might need a support group, a highly confidential one. So you say, you know what happened to me? That bastard, so-and-so male, did such and such. Might be very useful.
On that note, Professor, with respect to women helping other women, so I was wondering if I could hear your thoughts on the female-only professorships, because I know there was talk about that in Ireland, and some female professors who had made it per se, and were themselves doing really very well, were against the idea because they thought it should be more an equal opportunity for everyone, regardless of gender. But then I thought that was quite backwards in females not bringing each other up. Like if you're at the top, instead of bringing up the people that are lower down than you, it was almost excluding them for fear of competition. I was just wondering if you could talk your opinion on that.
Argument both ways on this kind of issue, but a number of institutions are creating posts that are only open to women, and those women are showing themselves to be immensely able. So I think it will probably work out okay. But there is undoubtedly the risk that people will say, you only got that because you're a woman. And it was a much lower standard competition and you're not fit to be in this prestigious department kind of argument. Alas, there are also a few queen bee women who reach the top and then pull the ladder up behind them, so they don't help other women. It does happen. I think queen bees quite enjoy being the center of attention with a whole lot of underling men.
So is there any way to combat that queen bee mentality, or to kind of
And spot it before you appoint them?
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question from Rachel. She asks, gender equality is still a long way off in Uganda and East Africa, where she is from. Will the Athena SWAN Award ever be considered at an institution considering change over there?
That really depends on the people who are funding things in Uganda or wherever. It can't be imposed from the outside by another country. But as it becomes more widely known, it may be that word reaches funding bodies in those countries. Or the funding bodies might decide actually it's too soon for this country, or, you know, funding bodies are probably predominantly male themselves. So it's a little bit hard to know what way it will go, at least initially.
One of our anonymous attendees remarked that 12-year-old Nia is wonderfully shocked that her Google search for famous physicists showed only 2 females.
Yes.
Our next question comes from Anne. How challenging has it been to move Athena SWAN into the arts, humanities, and other areas of universities? Is there a reason why non-science areas are slower to take on the changes required?
I don't really know the answer to that question. Arts and humanities followed simply because it was in science that we started it. And the need was greater there because there's much greater gender discriminate. Well, that's it. There are fewer women, proportionally fewer women in the sciences than in the arts and humanities. And in some of the arts and humanities, the issue is to find the men, not the women. So it becomes a slightly different exercise.
Okay, we have a next comment from Sarah. First of all, she said, brilliant talk. And then her question is, do you think institutions will also see a reduction in female percentages in STEM courses for new applicants this coming September after the lockdown? And then as a side note to this, you know, we have been seeing in the news that articles and publications right now, the females are less, there's less percentage of females publishing right now during the lockdown than males. So there already is starting to be showing signs of lockdown differences in gender.
I think in terms of first-year undergraduates, I wouldn't expect a particular change like that. But for researchers trying to get established, it becomes much more serious because you're trying to get established at about the same time as you have young children, if you're female. So that's the cohort that I particularly worry about. And yes, it's beginning to show.
One more question. So you said there's a risk that women's progress could be like ivy, with the underlying structure of society not actually changing. Are there specific things that you see that suggest this progress could be partly superficial? And what should we be doing to combat this?
I simply put in that question because I've noted that basically the question we're asking with Athena SWAN is, how are the women getting on? And the thing they're getting on in is the traditional university, often. And that doesn't seem to have, definitely hasn't changed its structure very obviously. You know, we still have professors, and I don't know if you use assistant professors, associate professors, or whether you use senior lecturer, lecturer. But you know, that kind of structure doesn't seem to me to have changed. Maybe it doesn't need to. I'm sure there are other similar structures in universities that probably haven't changed. maybe they'll change naturally, I don't know. But it does just strike me that we are enabling women to do better in a structure that was certainly very masculine when it was set up. And I would suspect it structurally still contains some masculinities, shall we say. What do other people feel? Is that a valid question?
Yes, no, I was at a workshop once for women in academia. And actually it was brought up that, you know, universities 1,000 years ago were created for men to have wives at home who are keeping the house, raising the children, making meals, and keeping them going. So it is quite tricky because, you know, the question always is, for a woman, when is the right time to stop and have children or to get married? I mean, there never is. You just have to choose when to do it.
I have a story from a UK university concerning a youngish married couple who have just had a baby. And technically in Britain, anybody can ask to work part-time. So the couple agreed that they'd each work a 4-day week, but take a different day off. And that meant that the kid would only be in care for 3 days of the week. So she, who worked in humanities, went to her head of department and explained this, and he said, fine, which day do you want off? He, who was a scientist, went to his head of department, who said, don't you dare think about it, even though it was legally allowable.
So you never know.
That's really interesting. The bias the other way here.
Yeah, I believe we're at the end of the questions. So I think we'd all like to really thank Professor Bell Burnell for a very inspiring talk and for sharing your thoughts and all the different aspects, not only being in the sciences, but fighting for gender equality and being one of the founders of that movement that now, yeah, we hit them at the belt line where you have to have, you know, you have to have certain regulations in order to have your funding. But everyone likes to give a really big thanks, and thank you very much, Professor, for your time. And as I said, this was our first online event, and in 2 weeks, we will have our next online event. It's looking at Black studies and the critical race perspectives in education. And this is the first module of its kind at University College Dublin. And so students from Dr. Eben Joseph's talk will share their experiences and their impressions of the course. And this will also be over Zoom. So continue to follow Women in Research Ireland on Twitter and Instagram to get all the information on attending. And thanks to everyone for attending. And again, a big special thanks to Professor Bell Burnell for educating us all today.
Thank you for the chance to be with you. All the best.
Thanks. Bye.